Japan.
Hi.
This is Andi Pla. She's a second-year law student here and is the president of the UO chapter of the National Lawyers Guild.
Hi, Andi.
So your book talks about the racialization of Asian American students and Latinx law students.
My husband was a first-year law student at the time, and I used to accompany him to UCLA Law School every Friday. And he would go to class, and I would kind of hang out in the student center. And there was just a lot of like really interesting words, right? Like torts and like civ pro. And I was like, what is this about, right? And it seemed like this whole new socialization, right? That was very different, right, than my grad school experience.
How would you characterize the socialization of law school?
Oh my God. It's like a new, right? It's like a new language, a new culture, a new way of thinking. One of my respondents, when I did interviews with the students, they were like, in the past, I would just walk by kind of this ladder and someone like doing construction on a roof. But now I'm thinking, what might be the possible, liabilities?
I did find myself after 1L, everything's a tort. Everywhere we go, even if you're out at night, wherever you are, that's a tort. That's a tort.
How did this socialization affect Asian and Latino law students?
So my argument is that racialization is a part of the socialization process, right? So the ways that the students would be called on in class to, have them called another student's name, right? So then kind of this merging of racial identity, what it means to be Asian American or Latino, became heightened in law school, whereas they might have identified themselves prior to law school as, ethnically, right? As, like, oh, I'm Guatemalan or I'm Korean or whatever. But in law school, you kind of all fit under this pan-ethnic umbrella because that's the way people socialize you. And then the ways that they are also, their stories or their experiences are marginalized, right, in the classroom. Like, discussions about race, like rarely talked about Asian Americans and Latinos, which then heightened their race even more.
You had talked about at one point that there was more written on Black law students and their experiences. So how would you say that the sort of discrimination or racialization that they face is different from the experience of Latinx and Asian American students?
Black students certainly face racialization and discrimination in law school, right? That's what we've seen in the literature. The one difference perhaps is the foreignizing of Asian American and Latino law students, right? The expectation that they are, yes, racial others, but also non-Americans. This one respondent, I called her Esperanza. She's Mexican American, and I remember she was posed a question about football. Right, I'm in class, right? And the professor paused and asked her, do you know what football is, right? Do you know American football, right? Because he thought she was probably thinking football and not football, right?
One of the things I thought was really interesting was your finding about expectations around what students would do after they graduated. And this sort of, were you being a sellout if you worked at a corporate job?
So they were quite conflicted. Right? It's on the one hand, they may be learning interesting things like tax law may become very interesting. I remember a couple of respondents saying that, they had a great tax law professor and tax law is all of a sudden kind of interesting. Maybe they don't want to work for a nonprofit. But then they felt that their duty was to give back to their communities. So
I feel like there's also like a gender aspect layered on top of that too.
Yes, the women absolutely felt that they needed to contribute more to their communities.
I think my grandma still hasn't accepted that I'm not going to be an attorney. Not that I've written it off, but she tells her whole family like, oh yeah, she's in law school and she's going to be an immigration lawyer. And I'm just like, I never told her that.
So one of the things that's so hard for me about all these questions is like, yes, it's important for people to do public interest work, but like, it's also really important for all these different communities to be represented in these corporate law firms.
Absolutely.
And that, having worked at a corporate law firm, like representation is really important in those settings. And
right. Absolutely. With like which firm was it? I can't remember now, where they published, right, their new partner class.
Yeah,
like
right.
And it was like all white men and there was like one white woman and that was it.
What advice would you have?
One is we need to change the law school culture. Like we're a very assimilationist society, right? We say we are welcoming, we say we are, a tossed salad or whatever, but really we have this one model, right, that we expect people to abide by if they are supposed to be successful in this country. The same thing with law school, right? The model is still a very heteronormative, white male, like upper middle class privileged model. Maybe the way that classes are run, that's one of the examples that that was in my work, with students always talked about, the Socratic method. Maybe the Socratic method needs to be different. And then my suggestion for students, like, raise questions, ask, how does this particular, issue apply to Latino communities?
So in dealing with that response about the, not wanting to come off as the angry woman of color, having to sort of toe the line and, okay, we're going to question these things, but in a way that sort of fits the way that they want it to be delivered.
Right. So how do you ensure that you're an advocate, but also making these important points? So yeah, like you're saying, towing the line. And that takes a lot of emotional labor, right? And that labor is often the burden of women, which is unfair, but also how cultures change.
Well, thank you so much. You were awesome. And I love your book. Where did I should have brought your book.
I have it right here.
Oh,
this is a wonderful
thanks.
book. I hope everyone reads it.
Thank you so much. Thanks for talking to me. I'm glad we could make this work.